students, it's Dr. Yu. We're now into the final segment of the How to Succeed in Job Interviews series. We have spent the first two segments just on preparation alone, and preparation is about 90 minutes of this entire series because preparation is that important. And if you don't have good preparation, the execution isn't going to go well. It's like an NFL team competing in a game without having had practice for a week. So you got to make sure you practice, you run through the playbooks, you prepare, you watch film, all those things. That's how you win. Same thing with preparing for doing interviews. Then in part 3, we did execution, at least the 5 types of questions. We still are in execution, but now in a different phase of the interview process. And then we're also going to learn how to follow up as well, because you got to make sure you do that well too to get to the next round of interviewing and eventually the job. Here's what we're going to talk about then. We're going to talk about asking questions, and we're going to talk about follow-up, just those two things. Let's talk about asking them questions. Now, here's what's going to happen. The interview is going to open. You're going to have some small talk. Then the interviewer is going to ask you the prepared questions that they have. And then depending on the interview style, what phase it is, all of that, it might be highly structured or very lowly structured. And it's just going to depend on the hiring process of that company as to what that's going to be. They're going to ask you the 5 types of questions, and then maybe something random too, who knows. But at least you'll have some preparation for the 5 types, plus all the job posting analysis that you did, plus the company research and all that. After the interviewer is done asking their questions, this is at the end of the interview usually, they're going to say something along the lines of, "Do you have any questions for us?" Now, this is a very critical moment in the interview, because the answer is always going to be yes. Why? Because imagine yourself on a date and your date asks you a bunch of questions. And so then, you answer the questions, you tell your date about yourself, you tell them about you tell them about your hobbies, you tell them what you like to do for fun, all those things, your dreams, your aspirations. And then your date goes, "Well, do you have any questions for me?" And you're like, No, you don't want to know anything? No? Okay. Imagine how that date's going to go. Not going to go well. Probably not going to get a second date. So you got to have questions for them, because you might be spending the next years, months, rest of your life with this company if it works out. So what you want to do is you want to have 3 to 5 educated questions prepared and ranked. Now there's a couple parts here. The question's got to be educated, and I'll explain what that means. Educated means when you ask the question, you're going to ask what you know plus what you don't know. What we want to ask here are questions that are not easily Googled, or questions that are stated directly on the website, or questions that are stated directly on the job posting. Now, if the question is vague, or let's say there's something on the job posting that is vague, then to show that you still read the job posting, you'll say, "Here's what the job posting says. What I want to know is, what does that mean? Or what does that entail?" That kind of thing. That's a good educated question about the job posting. Or if you saw something on the website and you want to know what that means, do that. But never ask questions that are either directly answered in the job posting or directly answered on the website, LinkedIn, social media pages, and such. You wouldn't know what's directly answered in the website, LinkedIn, social media pages if you don't do that preparation. So those 3 to 5 questions are going to be prepared. And what I mean by prepared is you already know you're going to ask them. And I highly, 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 highly recommend that you write them in your portfolio. So when they say, "Do you have any questions for us?" all you have to do is just flip to that portfolio page and there are your questions, as opposed to having to try to remember them. And you're like, "Yeah, wait, I have questions. Hang on a second. Yeah, I have a question. Yeah, no, we don't want to do that. We don't want to do that." Just go to the portfolio page and then just read your first question. And then you want to have them ranked. Here's what I mean by ranked. When you get to this phase of the interview and they say, "Do you have any questions for us?" you have to make a decision on the ground about time. If they said the interview was going to be 30 minutes and they ask you this question at the 20th minute, then you have 10 minutes. Okay, you probably can ask all 3 to 5 of your prepared questions because you have enough time. But if the interview gets behind schedule, and let's say you only have 5 minutes or even 3 minutes, what you want to do is triage your questions. You're not going to be able to ask all 3 of your questions, but you should still ask at least 1 or 2. So what I would do is rank the most important questions to the least important questions, because here's why the questions are important. Part of your decision making has to be, do I want to continue interviewing with this company? Do I want to move forward in the interview process? Do I see myself actually accepting the offer if they were to give it to me? This is your chance to ask your deal breaker questions. This is your chance for you to be the interviewer and then for them to be the interviewee. This is where the interviewer has to then perform well, and the interviewer has to answer your questions well. So any questions that you have about accepting the job should also be asked here, so that way you can make your decision with whether you want to continue with the process or not. So here's an example of an educated question. I see that the job posting states that I'll be conducting training workshops for new employees. Can you tell me more about how the training workshops will be structured and what topics they cover? So notice here, if we x-ray this, you have, here's what I know, because that's in the job posting. So I'm not just, so there's training workshops or something, or something like that. No, we know there is. And then here's the educated part. Okay, I know the job posting says that, so I did read the job posting, but what I want to know is, and then here's the part you actually want to know. And that's an educated question. Now, one thing you have to recognize, when you ask questions, that your questions are statements. If you ask, what is the tardy policy in the interview, the assumption is, why do you ask? Oh, well, this person must be tardy a lot because only a tardy person would care about the tardy policy. You see? So it's probably not a good idea to ask what the tardy policy is unless you're just a very tardy person or you perceive yourself as being tardy a lot to this job, but then you have to realize that that's going to have identity implications on you because now it's going to make the employer say, why'd they ask that? Another thing to keep in mind, let's say, and so if you have a low structured interview and the interviewer tells you things about the company, so this is a big thing. If the interviewer answers your questions as they interview you, because the interviewer talks a lot and does a lot of prefacing, which is perfectly fine, what do you do then? So here's what you do. When the interviewer says, do you have any questions for us? You're still going to say yes. And then what you're going to do is you're going to go through the prepared questions and answers, even if they're already asked and answered. But here's how you're going to do it. So this is the important part. So let's say, okay, they say, do you have any questions for us? And I'm going to say yes. Okay. So I'm going to pull out my notebook and I'm going to go to the questions that I prepared. Now, let's say they already answered question number 1. Here's what I would say. I would say, okay, so you answered my first question. My first question was about community involvement with the company and what you guys do for that. So just to make sure I got it right, you all do community involvement with Make-A-Wish Foundation. Is that correct? Okay, great. You also answered my second question. My second question was going to be this, this, and this. So just to reiterate, you said that this, right? Okay, but what about that? Okay, so now I can ask a follow-up question if something wasn't clear to me. And I just go through, maybe just depending on how much time I think I have, I'll go through 1 or 2 or 3 of the questions. If they answered everything, okay, great. And then just reiterate that I listened and that I got their answers and write those things down. And then also think about your job deal breakers. This is a great time to ask questions that are deal breakers. If you don't want to work overtime and you're perfectly okay with not accepting the position as is, ask about overtime. You don't want to work overtime. You don't want to work nights and weekends. There's ways to phrase the question so you don't sound angry or negative, but you can just say, is the job only 8 to 5 or are there weekend shifts as well? That's a good way to ask it. And if they say, yes, there's weekend shifts, and okay, are those mandatory or are those optional? Or are they overtime? It's okay to ask those kinds of questions. Okay, so you just don't want to sound negative, like you don't want to do any work, but there's ways to phrase the question so they still come across as positive and that you're a great employee. You just need to know some things. Here are my favorite questions to ask. I always like a question about collegiality. So one thing that's important to me when I work anywhere is I like watching Game of Thrones, but I don't like being on the show. So I want to feel like when I'm at my place of employment that I'm not playing Game of Thrones the whole time. So how does your company promote collegiality among its employees is a great question. Or what professional development opportunities are available at your company? So I'm always thinking about not just how can I fulfill a certain function, but how can I be better at fulfilling it? And how is the company going to help me do that? How is the company going to help me grow as a professional, not just maintain as a professional? And so I'm always interested in what professional development opportunities are available. What I like about that question is it shows that I care about growth and I care about wanting to be better. And that's a good question to ask that has a good statement behind it. And both of these things are important to me, by the way. I don't ask these things just to score points. I ask these because these things actually do matter to me. And then a question I always like to ask at the very end, like okay, I've asked all my questions, and then just like the very last one before we're about to get up is, what are the next steps? So it's a good question to ask, just so you know, are they going to call you in 2 weeks? Are they hoping to fill the position quickly? That's where I like to know what the next steps are, so then I can plan my follow-up. If they say, oh, we still have 10 interviews to do, and we plan on filling the position by the end of the month, okay, great. That gives me a timeline then. Okay, by the end of the month, I should know one way or the other, and then I can plan my follow-up on that timeline. So sometimes the interviewer will do this for you automatically. They will tell you the timeline, they'll tell you the next steps, but sometimes the interviewer doesn't. So that's why you want to have that question ready, just in case it doesn't seem like they're going to do that. So here's what you want to do. You want to prepare 3 questions for your job target. Pretend as if you're going to be interviewing for the job target that you picked, and then prepare 3 written questions that you can ask the employer. And you can use the topics that I talked about, but really think about your deal breakers. Like, what are your deal breakers for accepting or working at a company? What would make you want to quit, in other words? And then what are some questions that can ensure that once you take this position, you're not going to regret it later? Okay, if you need more time, pause the video, but definitely have these 3 questions. I usually recommend 5, and then you can rank them, and then that way you always have something. But the worst answer to, do you have any questions for us? The absolute worst, terrible answer is no. That is the worst answer to that question that you can give to that. Have something to ask. And like I said, if they already answered the questions, that's fine. Show that you listened well, and that you had questions prepared, and that they answered them. Okay, now let's say the interview's over and you're driving home. Here's the next thing you got to do. So the interview process isn't done because, number 1, you still might have 2, 3, 4, 5 rounds of interviews depending on the type of position it is and its prestige and all those things. So you may not even be done on that front anyway. But what you want to do next is, when you get home, probably within 12 to 24 hours of arriving home, you want to send a thank you email to the interviewer. Why? It's just courtesy, number 1. Number 2, it's an opportunity to remind the employer about who you were or who you are and your selling points. Because you have to remember, they're interviewing multiple people at a time. If you're candidate number 7 out of 10 in the interview process, it's very easy to be forgotten because they just talked to 10 different people and it's hard to remember the details of everyone, okay? And then depending on how they did interviews that day, like I've sat on committees where we interviewed all day and we're just exhausted by like 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. And we just talked to like 8 candidates and it's just exhausting. And then you just naturally forget things. Like things start to blur together. And was that candidate number 4 who said this, or candidate number 5? Like everything just blends in. So you want to have a way to kind of remind the employer who you are, why you're awesome, and that you're thinking of them. So you want to write a thank you email. Now here's what goes into a thank you email. There's a couple things. First, you want to thank them for the opportunity because it's a thank you email after all. So you want to thank them for giving you the opportunity to interview and thanking them for giving you their time. I mean, look, when you're interviewing for jobs, it's not just the HR people interviewing. You have to interview with managers and supervisors and potential colleagues. They're leaving their regularly assigned duties to be with you, to talk to you. So you want to thank them for doing that because they're falling behind in work by interviewing you. Secondly, you want to use that as an opportunity to kind of briefly restate your selling points and the highlights of the interview. So you want to remind them, what is it that makes you special? What was it about this interview that you think really makes you stand out? And just kind of remind them gently. You're not writing a sales letter, so it's not going to be you're not writing a 5-paragraph letter here with like each selling point highlighted and all that stuff. I mean, some people do that and that's like, but to me it's kind of try hard. But you still want to remind them about why you're awesome. And then you want to affirm that you're still interested in the position. And here's why this is important. Sometimes, and this happens, I've had clients tell me this all the time. Sometimes it's not about who was the best fit. It was about who seemed like they wanted it more. And I've seen a candidate or two just get dismissed in the hiring process because they didn't seem like they really wanted the job. They just didn't seem like it. And maybe they really did. And maybe they really wanted this job, but just by their demeanor or like their nonverbals, we couldn't tell. And so people on the committee were just like, I don't really think they want the job. I think John sounds more, or Mary sounds more excited and all that. So what you got to do in the thank you email is affirm your continued interest in the position. Now, if you interview at a company and you decide, I don't want to move forward with this, I'm not interested, not for me, that kind of thing, the way you bow out of the interviewing process is through the thank you email. And so what you would do is you wouldn't have point 2. What you would do is you would just thank them, and then you would decline the to continue. So you would bow out of the race and I'll show you how to do that. So here's a thank you email for continued interest in the position. So you're going to start off with, thank you for the opportunity to interview for the Data 1 analyst position. I enjoyed learning more about your company's cutting edge approach to big data analysis and its bright future. With my extensive background in data analysis and a common passion for improving patients' lives, so it's a medical company, I know I will excel in the position. If there are any further materials that I can provide to demonstrate my qualifications for this position, please let me know. Thank you again for your time. Sarah. Okay, so basically, if you x-ray this, you have the initial thank you, you have a restatement of your selling points and highlights, and then your continued interest. So it's a very short email. It's not like a long 5-paragraph, 10 pages, that kind of thing. But, you want it to be substantial, so you just don't want to say thanks, and that's it, that kind of thing. You have some substance, but it's not too much to where it becomes a sales letter, but it's not too little where you miss the opportunity to really do something. So you could maybe add a sentence or two to this, like this part, but yeah, it's okay for now. It's okay for now. Now, if you're bowing out of the interview, though, here's what you would do. So you would say, Dave, thank you for the opportunity to interview for the Data Analyst 1 position. I enjoyed learning more about your company. So basically just thanks. And then just go straight to declining. As much as I enjoyed our conversation, I would like to continue exploring position opportunities with some other companies. Thank you again for your time and consideration. Okay, so you basically have said that I want to continue looking elsewhere. You don't have to say anything mean. Your company's too big. Your company's too small. Man, like that kind of thing. You just, I'd like to stay. I like to keep my options open. I'm not looking to commit right now. And there you go. You don't need to ghost the employer. Okay, this is where dating and job hunting differ. Like, you don't ghost the employer. You have to remember that depending on what your industry is, what city you're in, people talk. And your employer, whoever the person you interviewed with, might know people. And when we talk about networking, that's where karma comes back. Networking, everything comes back. And so you don't know who knows who talks to who, all that stuff. You don't want to burn bridges with an employer ever. So you always want to end with a thank you, end it positive, and that keeps the door open for future opportunities, future business, all of those things. So end it professionally, good. And that's it. So asking questions, you got to have those. The worst answer you can give is no. And have that follow-up email. Like I said, 12 to 24 hours is usually good. I don't like to send the email same day just because I want at least the employer to sleep on it, because they're going to forget about half of it the next day, and then give them that reminder the next day after they've slept on it. So then I'm fresh in their minds. And then when they decide to it's hard to know when they make the next decision, because they might do it same day, or they might do it the next day or the next week. But at least I've extended my presence by 24 hours. And that's my thinking behind it. Anything beyond 72 hours, even 48 hours, I think is too late to do a thank you email for something like that. And that's pretty much it with interviewing. So you've completed the interview seminar, and now you know from start to finish what you got to do to succeed in a job interview. I love job interviewing. I think it's the most fun part of the job search. It's like going on dates and getting to learn about new opportunities and feeling valued because, you made the cut out of hundreds of people potentially, and there you are. You get to talk to somebody and build a network connection. So I hope you learn to love interviewing just as much as I do, and you can be very good at it if you just practice and prepare. So go do it and go get a great job at a great company.